Today in this lecture, we're going to finally get to some of the transcription type stuff. We're going to be talking about vowels, specifically the type of vowels that are called monophthongs. They are steady vowels. That means your tongue doesn't move while they are being produced. And just a reminder, your notes are going to look a little different from these. This is a little bit shortened because I'm only going to cover the important parts. I've given you some extra information, but things like common spellings for all of these different vowels, I will never ask you about because I want you to focus on the sounds, not the letters. And there's other information, though, that you might find helpful, like where these vowels occur. You'll see words like initial, meaning at the beginning of a word, medial at the middle, or final at the end. Those are the types of distribution in the word, but that's not needed specifically for this course, but you have that information for reference later if you want. And the developmental stage is also something that you might find interesting, but not something you'll be tested on. It's something that might help you later on when you're talking about childhood acquisition. But whether a vowel is learned early on or later is not something you need to know. So that's just for your reference. There's other things that you notice in your book that we'll get to later. So they're not included in the notes, but it is in your assigned reading. So just file that away for later. We will talk about that towards the end of the semester. And just to remind you, what we're going to do is we're going to go through each vowel, and I'm going to say it for you, and I'm going to talk about how we classify it. So last time we talked about vowels being either part of the IPA, or we can talk about how vowels are actually produced. We have so-called primary vowels that you see on the IPA chart, and that is not exactly the way we're going to talk about it now. We're going to talk about how American English speakers produce it and where it falls on this quadrilateral that kind of represents how your tongue is positioned within your mouth. So we have our one dimension here going sort of from the front of the mouth to sort of that center part, or the tongue is towards the back relatively. Or we can talk about vowels being produced with the tongue high in the mouth, middle of the mouth, and low. So we have those two things. Things could be front and high. In that case, it'll be produced in this section. Or vowels could also be produced with the tongue low and back in the mouth. All right, and we're also going to mention things like whether vowels are rounded or not, rhotic, tense or lax, or if they are long or short. All right, so we're going to go through all of that for each vowel. And we're going to start with the group of vowels that are produced relatively towards the front of the mouth, but as you can see, they range from high to low. All right, our first vowel is E, and all right, there we go. So you can see the symbol. And this is how E is produced. All right, but the important thing to remember, you need to start remembering these very basic terms, is that it is a high front vowel. That's how we're going to describe it. It's a high front vowel, and it is also unrounded. And to distinguish it from the next vowel we're going to talk about, that's also high front, we're going to say that it is tense, meaning that it has a little bit more muscle activity. And if you compare this vowel, E, and then you say the next one, you should feel the difference. E, I, E, I. Especially if you hold your fingers underneath your chin so you can feel those muscles that make up part of your tongue there. You'll feel them really tense while you produce E, and then they'll relax when you move to I. And E is also one of our long vowels. All right, I, as we already mentioned, is our next vowel. And I also happens to be a high front unrounded vowel. So if you are describing it in those terms, you can make it clear which vowel you mean by mentioning it's the high front lax unrounded vowel. And it's one of our short vowels in English. This next vowel is E, as in get, and it happens to be a mid-front vowel. And it is also unrounded. The lips are not rounded at all. And it is considered a lax vowel when you pair it with a vowel A. That even there, I have a hard time not saying it as a diphthong. It's a vowel we're going to talk about later. But that very beginning part, A, is tenser than E. And it's one of our short vowels. All right, now moving down to the lowest position of our front vowels, we have A, as in cat, A. And it is a low front, unrounded vowel, and it is considered a pretty lax vowel. Although it doesn't have a nice vowel to pair it with that we use phonemically in English, but you can remember that it is lax. And it's one of our shorter vowels. Okay, moving to the back of the mouth. We have all of these vowels. Here I put the symbols here, and we're going to sort of go around in sort of a U shape and start low and move our way back up in the mouth. Okay, we are onto our next vowel here, Ah. Ah is a low back, unrounded vowel. And compared to the next vowel we're going to talk about, it's tense and a bit of a long vowel, relatively long. So we group it with our long vowels of E that we've talked about so far. We haven't gotten to the next ones like aw. And aw is also a long vowel, and there's some debate over what it is in terms of whether it's tense or lax. But in this class, we're going to consider it lax. It's laxer than ah, and it's a little bit tenser, it has more muscular activity than some of the lax vowels we're talking about, but generally we can consider it lax. All right, so our vowel ah is a mid-back rounded vowel, though it is rounded with the lips slightly rounded, and it is lax and also considered a long vowel. All right, moving a little bit higher up in the mouth, we have the vowel as in put. All right, and is a high back rounded vowel, and it is considered a lax vowel and a relatively short vowel as well. And it is considered lax because it's not as tense as the next closest vowel, oo. Right? And oo, the tongue is much tenser, and we consider oo a high back rounded vowel. And to distinguish it between oo and we can talk about whether the vowels are tense or lax. But oo is also another one of our long vowels. All right, so we finished talking about all the vowels sort of in this area and in this area, and that leaves us with things that are sort of relatively central. They're sort of considered neutral vowels. You'll hear some people call them that because that's sort of the default tongue position, is sort of resting there right in the middle of the oral cavity. So you get these vowels here that we're going through, and they're all going to have relatively close descriptions to each other. One way to keep them separate, though, when you're talking about central vowels, is to consider whether they are non-rhotic or rhotic. And as you remember from before, rhotic just means R-like. So they either have some sort of R sound to them or they don't. And the first one we're going to talk about is and it has this little symbol here that looks like an upside down V, basically. All right, and is our low central non-rounded vowel. And if you want to be specific, you can call it non-rhotic to distinguish it from some of the other vowels we're talking about. And it is a lax vowel, and it is a short vowel. Right? And although it's relatively lax, it's used in stressed syllables because you're going to hear it's going to sound just like the next vowels. They sound very close, but the different symbols are used to reflect whether the vowel is stressed or not, something that you're going to work towards hearing. So at this point, I'm not concerned if you mix these symbols up when transcribing words, but I'd like you to be able to describe their articulatory properties. All right, so saying whether they are low, like or like this symbol here, which is considered, instead of being low, it is a mid-central unrounded vowel. And this one has a special name. It's called schwa. Right? It's used for unstressed syllables, and it's also pronounced as in about. That first sound there in the word about. And it is also a lax vowel and also non-rhotic. It's not sounding anything like R, and it's also a short vowel. All right, our next vowel is the first of our rhotic vowels. So they're going to sound a little R-like. And this one is All right, and they both sound also very similar, but this one's used in stressed syllables, like word. And it's considered a mid-central, unrounded, rhotic vowel, and it is tense. And it's also a long vowel because when vowels get stressed, they're relatively longer, among other things that happen to them. All right, so it's considered longer than our next vowel here, which is also but it's a relatively short production of that sound. And is considered a mid-central, unrounded rhotic vowel, and it is lax as well. But unlike the previous vowel, this one would be more like the sound when you say paper. At the end of that word, you're saying a really short vowel. It's not really stressed or emphasized compared to word, where we would use the other symbol. This one is just short and quick, and the tongue is lax when it is produced. All right, so that's a lot of vowels to learn. So what I would like you to focus on is associating each of these symbols with the sound and remembering all these descriptions. So at the minimum, you're going to have to tell me whether the tongue is front versus back, is it high or low in the mouth, and are the lips rounded or unrounded? All right, and as you work to learn these in more detail, also be able to describe. Some of these are produced with the lips spread. You can talk about how they are produced in more detail and pay attention to the descriptions here about what's going on with the tongue in more detail. But first I would start with the basics. Front versus back, high versus low, and rounded or unrounded. And then you can get into more detail with the descriptions and whether the vowel is long or short and whether it's tense or lax. All right, so this is going to be a lot of information, and I recommend that you do it. Focus on a few vowels and a few minutes of study every day. All right, and let me know what questions you have after you've completed the warm-up.